So today we're going to give an intro to AFC, an overview of the laws and the regs. We're going to talk about gender and sexuality at school. We're going to talk about bullying, harassment, and discrimination, and the protections that LGBTQ students have against those things in New York City. We're going to talk about some alternative school options and options to change schools, LGBTQ students in discipline, LGBTQ students in temporary housing, and then finally, we're going to wrap up with some resources, guidance, and ideas for school-based support. So just to get us started, Advocates for Children is an independent agency that protects the rights of all New York City students. So we have a helpline that anyone can call, parents, students, professionals. We are live and answering calls Monday through Thursday, 10 to 4, but you are also free to leave a voicemail. We give calls back usually within about 3 business days. We also have a number of guides and resources on our website, which was recently redesigned. Hopefully it's very easy to search, find what you're looking for. But I would take a look if you haven't been there in a few months. We provide workshops and trainings like this, so public-facing webinars that are open to all, and we come into specific programs, schools, and run requested workshops and trainings. We also provide free legal services to students and families of low income. So families who are interested in advocacy or legal services can give our helpline a call and ask to be referred for representation. So starting off, we just want to make sure that we're all using the same terms. So to define some shared language, when I'm using the term LGBTQ+, I'm referring to lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, or questioning students. And then gender identity is a person's experience of their own gender, their innermost concept of self as masculine, feminine, a blend of both, another gender, or none. So that is who someone is. And then as opposed to sexual orientation, which is who someone's attracted to. So that's the person's identity in relation to who they are attracted to physically, romantically, and or emotionally. So just to highlight some key laws and regulations, you do not need to, let's say something is wrong and you're trying to address it, you do not need to be able to point to exactly which regulation says it's wrong. This information is here to help you, but please do not feel like you need to memorize it or be able to quote the law or the regulation directly. It's just here to give you context if it's helpful. So Title IX is a law that protects against sexual and gender-based harassment and discrimination. That is a federal law. Then there is also the New York State Human Rights Law, state law. Then we get into DOE-specific regulations. So the Chancellor's Regulation A830 is the anti-discrimination policy for staff to student discrimination. And then we've got Chancellor's Reg A831, and that protects against student-to-student sexual harassment. And then finally, Chancellor's Regulation A832, which you may have heard referred to as DASA, the Dignity for All Students Act, and that protects against student-to-student discrimination, harassment, intimidation, and or bullying, which includes gender or sexual orientation. And then we have DOE policies. So there are 3 policies that are useful to think about here. We've got the guidelines to support trans and gender expansive students, the guidelines on gender inclusion, and then the Student Bill of Rights. So, know your rights. In New York City, LGBTQ students have the right to feel safe at school, be safe from bullying, harassment, and discrimination, be out or not be out at school, and freely express their gender. We're going to go into more depth about the specific policies like bathrooms, locker rooms, gender-neutral dress codes, use of names and pronouns, but these are the overarching themes that are accomplished through these policies, right? So if you are an LGBTQ student, you are entitled to safely and freely be yourself at school, whatever that means for you. So thinking about names and pronouns. Students must address students by the name and program pronoun, that they use, that the student uses. Does not require the school seeking parents' consent or the student proving that they've gotten a legal name or gender marker change. They don't even need to get a legal name or gender marker change. If I go to school and say, my name is Anna, my pronouns are she, her, the school needs to address me using that name and pronouns. Refusing to do so or unintentionally referring to a student verbally or in writing, so like when you're speaking or in an email, for instance, referring to the student by the wrong name or pronouns, that's bullying or harassment, and it can be reported as such. We'll go into the steps to do that later on. I just want to make that clear from the outset. In terms of enforcement or implementation, the principal of your school is responsible for enforcing this policy with staff, so making sure that the school staff are calling students by their name and pronouns. And then staff are responsible for making sure that students are calling other students by their names and pronouns. So if a student is enrolling in the DOE school for the first time, they can and should just give their pronoun and their preferred name. They do not need to have a legal name change or have a legal gender marker change in order to provide that information to the school. Name and gender are self-reported. They don't require documentation. Let's say you want to update your name and pronouns in school records. The process is a little bit different for non-permanent records as opposed to permanent school records. So permanent records are things like report cards, transcripts. If you are a student with an IEP, your special education evaluations or your IEP. And then non-permanent records are things that are a little bit less formal. So things like your school ID card, your middle school diploma as opposed to a high school diploma, which is a formal record, permanent record, guidance logs, the graduation program, so like the program that's handed out at graduation, the roster for a sports team or a yearbook. So for non-permanent records, like all of those, all you have to do is ask. You just ask your school, please update my name and pronouns to XYZ. The school can't require documentation to make those changes. For permanent school records, so for things we talked about like a diploma, report card, transcript, that does require having the school update ATS, which is the computer system that has everything from your name, your address, contact info, attendance. So since that has to be updated, it requires parental consent unless the student is emancipated or is already over 18. And if your school has any questions about like the mechanics of how to do this, they should email lgbtq@schools.nyc.gov. You're going to see us reference that email very often. It is for the office that oversees all LGBTQ student programs and issues. And they are well versed in the mechanics of the logistics of how to make these updates. And then there's the sorts of permanent records that you might be updating while you're still enrolled at school, or that you might be updating after you've graduated. So I said diploma earlier. That would be a better example to talk about here, because that's something that you can only update after you've already graduated, right? You've received your diploma. So if you're trying to update a permanent record while you're still enrolled and you have a legal name or gender marker change, you just bring the court order showing that name change or documentation of a legal change of gender marker, bring that to the school and ask them to update ATS. If you haven't obtained a legal name or gender marker change, there's a form that you submit. It's linked in the slides, which will be provided afterwards. That form does have to be signed by a parent, but if you're emancipated or you're over 18, you can submit the form yourself. So if you need to make a change to your name and pronouns in a permanent school record after you've graduated or after you've left school, you contact your old school with documentation of that legal change of name or gender marker, and then the school should then forward that request to someone at the district level. If they have questions or they don't know to do this on their own, it might be helpful to say, hey, I think you're supposed to forward that to the academic policy, performance, and assessment specialist who can update ATS. And then they'll be able to issue the updated record. And then just a quick flag, if you're curious about how to obtain a legal name change, you can do that in civil court. So go to the clerk's office, ask for the form to make a legal name change. If you're under 18, you do have to go with a parent or guardian. The name change costs about $65, but if you can't afford this, there is an option to file as what's called a poor or indigent person. And then you'll just have to document your finances and you can avoid that $65 charge. Okay, so then thinking about names and locker rooms at school. So students can use the bathroom or the locker room that aligns with their gender identity, and schools cannot force a student to use an alternative facility like a gender neutral or a single occupancy bathroom or changing area. So if I want to use the girls' bathroom, I can use the girls' bathroom. I don't have to go and use maybe like a single occupancy stall that is in the nurse's office or like way down the hall where it's only one bathroom. I can use the girls' locker room. If I want or I need extra privacy because of my gender identity, the school does need to let me use a gender neutral or a single stall bathroom. So that could be, maybe it's an accessible bathroom in the school building. It's the bathroom that's usually designated for teachers. It's the bathroom in the nurse's office, but it's single occupancy. It gives me the privacy that I need. If I want that privacy, I'm able to use it, but I should not be forced to use that option. And if a student wants to keep their transgender status confidential, their bathroom, their changing area, or their changing schedule, so like what time they change for PE or sports, must allow them to do so. So really, if they need protection, the school needs to offer them that protection. And then thinking about gender inclusive school-wide policies. So I talked about those two DOE policies, the guidelines on gender inclusion and the guidelines on supporting trans and trans, non-binary, and gender expansive students. Those policies lay out certain rules, certain policies that all schools have to follow. And they have the goal of being as gender inclusive as possible. So, for instance, according to the DOE style guide, schools should use gender neutral language in all written communication. I'm, a principal and I'm sending out a letter. I shouldn't be reporting to, or I shouldn't be referring to boys and girls. I should just be saying students, right? An all-encompassing word that captures all of the students in my building. I don't need to specifically refer to students by gendered language. If a school is a single gender school, so we have some high schools, middle schools in New York that are single gender, students are eligible to apply to those schools based on their gender identity asserted at school, even if ATS does not reflect that gender identity. So if at school I tell my teachers, my principal, I'm a girl, I am eligible to apply to an all-girls school. If your gender has not been updated in ATS, then when it comes time for school applications, your school counselor is going to need to work with the Office of School Enrollment and the senior field counsel for their district so that they ensure that your application is actually like received and goes through the right process. But you are absolutely eligible to apply. And then thinking about gender-based policies, rules, and practices, schools should remove any policies or practices that don't serve a clear instructional purpose. So things like gender-based superlatives like best dressed girl, the funniest boy, like the male class clown, the girl class clown. Schools should not be giving out superlatives that are gendered. They could just say the funniest student, the best dressed student. It does not have to be based on gender. Similarly, schools should not have gendered graduation attire. So things like girls are in white, boys are in blue. It should just be one graduation gown that's gender neutral. Plenty up by gender, alternating boy, girl, boy, girl. Policies like that don't serve a clear pedagogical purpose, there's not an instructional reason why it's done that way, it shouldn't be done. And then the students must be allowed to participate in all school activities according to their gender identity. So let's say there is a specific club or a sports team, if that is for a particular gender, if that is the gender that I assert at school, I am entitled to participate in that club, in that sports team, whatever it is. Dress codes similarly must be gender neutral. So there should not be a different set of rules for girls versus boys. The dress code rules should be applicable to all, and I should be able to dress in a way that is, I should be able to dress in a way that is comfortable for me and my gender identity, and still be following the dress code, because the dress code should just be gender neutral. Student clubs must be open to all. Health classes and sex ed must be inclusive, affirming, and they can't be segregated by gender. So health classes and sex ed classes need to be talking about students of gender identities beyond just cis students. It needs to be talking about students of sexual orientations beyond just straight students, to be inclusive of all experiences, all genders, all sexual orientations. And then for PE, schools may not separate students by gender for PE, except for contact sports. So if your PE class should just be all students, and then groups can only be separated by gender if it's a contact sport like wrestling. School students must be permitted to participate in PE, intramural sports, athletic competitions, and contact sports based on their gender identity. So contact sports can be separated by gender, but if I am a girl, I can participate in the girls wrestling team. If it's the gender identity that I assert at school, I'm entitled to participate in activities for that gender. And then for paired or partner activities, like in school, I had a square dancing unit in PE. I don't know if that exists here or still, but they would divvy us up by, again, they'd have like boys line up on one side, girls line up on one side, and then we were paired, and the girls were given one instruction and the boys were given one instruction. That is not allowed to happen in New York City schools, thanks to the gendered guidelines. So for paired and partner activities, it should just be person A, person B. It should not be that you have a different role in the dance or whatever the activity is based on your gender. And then thinking about privacy and supporting students. So you all may be familiar with FERPA, that is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. The protections of that act apply to info about a student's trans or gender expansive identity and sexual orientation. So essentially, FERPA says that only parents and people who parents designate, so they give written permission, they sign a FERPA, what's called a FERPA release, only those people can access information about a student at school. So that applies to whether a student is trans, whether they are queer, whether they're bi. That's not information that should just be shared willy-nilly. It should only be shared with people who are entitled to that information under FERPA. Schools also should be considering a student's health and safety as they balance supporting a student with keeping their parents informed. So the student's health and safety are paramount. Schools really can't assume that just because a student is out at school that they're out at home. So really they need to have a conversation with the student. That's what we talk about in the last set of bullet points here. They should really have a conversation with the student. A trusted school staff should meet with the student and talk about like, what do you want to do here, right? How, let's say they're transitioning. What's the timeline at which you want to transition outwardly at school? When do you want to change the information in your school records, if ever? What are the steps that we can take to make sure that school is a safe, inclusive environment for you? And part of that conversation should be like, how do you want me to refer to you when I call your parents or during parent-teacher conferences? Should I use the name that you're using at school? Should I use the pronouns that you're using at school? What do you want to do? Really we should empower and give the student agency in this situation. Let the student lead the decision making. And then finally, gender and sexuality alliances, GSAs, are student-run clubs that provide a safe place for LGBTQ students and allies to meet, find support, and plan activities. Studies show that they can decrease anti-LGBTQ bullying and harassment and just make students feel safer and more comfortable to be at school. Under federal law, the Equal Access Act, public schools cannot prohibit students from starting a GSA if there are already other non-academic clubs at the school. So if there's a baking club and not just a math club, the school has to allow a GSA to start. And all student clubs have to be treated the same way and have equal access to school resources. Should not be that a GSA does not have space on campus to meet or things like that. This is something that's really important to me when I was in school, although not in New York. My friends and I were not allowed to start a GSA, and that did not feel good as a queer kid at school. So what happens if a school does not follow these policies that we've all said? They sound great in practice, right? But what do we do if things do not go according to plan? So first, these guidelines, the guidelines to support trans gender expansive students and the guidelines on gender inclusion are really thorough. They have laid out, step by step what schools do to update ATS for a pronoun change or a name change, how to handle when a student is applying to a single gender school. It really lays out step by step. So the easiest and the first thing to do is just point your school to those guidelines, right? If you continue to have problems, connect, talk to your school's Respect for All liaison, talk a little bit more about who that is and how to figure out who it is, talk to your principal. If you want to go beyond your school and go to the district level, you can email respectforall@schools.nyc.gov or call the number on the slide, 718-935-2288. If you want to go to a team that is well-versed specifically in supporting LGBTQ students, you can contact that office for the whole school district, lgbtq@schools.nyc.gov. And finally, if we really need to go beyond the DOE, you can, or beyond the district level, you can file a complaint with the Office of Equal Opportunity online or by calling this number. So talking about bullying, harassment, and discrimination, like all New York City students, LGBTQ students are entitled to protection from bullying, harassment, and discrimination. Throughout this, I may refer to it as bullying, just as a catch-all, but when I say bullying, I'm including harassment and discrimination. Students are protected whether they self-identify as LGBTQ or gender binary, or someone thinks that they do. So either I identify as queer or someone thinks that I am queer and they are bullying me, I'm protected either way. So thinking about what bullying is, bullying can be physical, verbal, social, like using social dynamics, excluding a student from a larger social group. It could be in writing, it can be electronic. We're all very familiar with cyberbullying and social media. Anything that leads to a hostile environment for a student at school, that is bullying. So what is a hostile environment? It's an environment that affects a student's learning, affects a student's mental, emotional, or physical well-being. Does not need to be that a student is physically getting hurt at school. If they do not feel safe at school, if they do not feel like they can be themselves at school, that's a hostile environment. It causes fear for safety. Again, even without a physical altercation happening, if I am afraid of that, that's a hostile environment. And it causes or could cause physical injury or emotional harm. If any of these things are true, it's a hostile environment. You don't need to have all of them. So in addition to the definition of bullying being really expansive, the situations in which bullying occurs, and the situations that the DOE is responsible for addressing that bullying is also really expansive. So bullying that happens, any bullying that affects the school community or disrupts learning is bullying that needs to be addressed by the DOE. So that's true whether it happens like physically at school, on school grounds, or on school property, even if it's before or after school, at a school-sponsored event, after school hours, on school buses, or completely outside of school, just in the neighborhood or online, if it disrupts learning or harms the school community. I do want to point out buses, because we live in New York City and buses sometimes go between multiple schools. And so it could be that, unfortunately, it could be that a student is being bullied by students from other schools. The student's school is still responsible for addressing this bullying. It's just going to require collaboration across multiple schools if the students involved go to multiple schools. Okay, so schools must both prevent and address, but schools must both address and prevent future bullying. So these are things that have to happen every year proactively in order to prevent bullying. So, and again, this is all according to the law. This is according to the Chancellor's Reg A832, I believe, which is DASA. So every year, schools have to create a plan to prevent and address harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So like, what are you going to do at your specific school to prevent those things from happening? Not to address them once they've happened, but to prevent them in the first place. They also have to publicize, so they've got to share respect for all, which is the DOE policy about promoting respect for diversity and inclusive school environments. They have to share that with students and parents every single year. And they need to make DASA A832, sorry, Chancellor's Reg A832 available to parents every single year. So essentially reminding parents what their rights are. They also need to train, they need to have a respect for all trained liaison on staff at the school. So there should be one person who, again, is called the respect for all liaison, who's the point person on all things bullying, harassment, and discrimination. And all students and staff have to be trained on bullying policies by October 31st every single year. And then it comes to action, right? So bullying has to be reported, it has to be investigated, and it has to be stopped. So RFA, or Respect for All, it's linked here, but it is the DOE program to promote respect for diversity and create inclusive school environments. The goal is to provide a safe and supportive learning environment for all students by preventing discrimination, harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So this is an LGBTQ students' rights training. This is a policy that applies to all students, not just LGBTQ students, but it is particularly relevant unfortunately, given the high levels of bullying, harassment, and discrimination that LGBTQ experience. We'll get into that a little bit later. So every school has to have that RFA liaison, and that is one point person who's specifically trained, but all school staff are responsible for reporting and addressing bullying. And the whole goal for that role, the RFA liaison, is to prevent the bullying, harassment, and discrimination. This is also going to be someone who, it's an additional hat that they wear. Sometimes it's the parent coordinator, sometimes it's the guidance counselor, the social worker, but they are given the designation of RFA liaison. So reporting bullying. Anyone can report an incident. You can do it by going to the school and talking to school staff, emailing, calling anyone on staff at the school, submitting a report online. That report can be anonymous, linked here, by calling 311 or by emailing Respect for All. So even if you report at the district or central level by reporting online or calling 311 or emailing Respect for All, it will always get back to the school to handle. But anyone can report to any school staff in person or by phone. But it's easiest to track when it's in writing. Personally, I am always pro email. Easy to keep track of, easy to pull together all your receipts. You can report in any language, and you should provide as much detail as possible. When you do report, you should ask for what's called an ORS report. ORS stands OORS is the DOE's online occurrence reporting system. It is essentially any report would have to be logged in that system. So you want to make sure that it captures the full incident. Ask for that report and reference number. And another thing to keep in mind that's really important is no one can be retaliated against for reporting bullying. So if you are a student and you see bullying happening, if you are a parent and you're worried about your student being retaliated against, you are protected. No one can be retaliated against for reporting bullying. So once a bullying report is made, then the school has to do an investigation. The principal has to investigate within 5 days and make a determination of whether it was in fact bullying, and if so, how they're going to address it. So then we get into response, and then finally, prevention. So making sure that it does not happen again. One thing to keep in mind when we get to the decision is as the parent of a student who has experienced bullying, you are absolutely entitled to know what the determination was, right? Like whether it was determined to be bullying or not, but you are not entitled to specific information about how they are responding to the situation. So you aren't entitled to know like whether the student's been suspended and for how many days, but you are entitled and should get something in writing about whether they did determine that it was bullying. Okay, so let's say a school says that they do the investigation and they determine that it was not bullying. These are the steps that we would recommend taking. First, contact the principal again. If that doesn't work, email Respect for All at schools, call the school superintendent's office. So at the district level, if you click this link, you'll be able to figure out who your superintendent is. And within 30 days, you also have the option of filing an appeal with the Commissioner of Education. If the school does determine that the incident was bullying, they have to, again, not just address it, but also prevent it. And they should recommend supports for all students involved. So the student who experienced bullying, as well as the student who exhibited bullying behaviors. And that can look like a lot of things. It could be individual counseling, positive behavioral supports, academic supports and services, social skills training, training in emotional coping skills, cooperative problem solving, restorative practices. They could create a safety plan with the family. And if it's cyberbullying, they can also do a training on digital citizenship. If your school has questions about how to actually do this, or you want some help coming up with support specifically for an LGBTQ student, I would recommend reaching out to LGBTQ at school. So then thinking about safety plans, we mentioned this is one of the ways to prevent future bullying. So you can ask the school for a meeting to create a safety plan. This could look like changing a student's seat, their schedule, their program, their lunchtime, changing what time they get to school or leave school. Maybe they leave a few minutes early or they leave a couple minutes late, whatever it is, so that they can avoid some of those interactions. The safety plan can designate a safe adult at school. So knowing like, okay, if something's happening, I'm going to go talk to so-and-so. The safety plan can also say all staff are going to be notified of the bullying history. So if my classes change mid-year or I move into the next grade, that proactively the staff are going to be notified, hey, so-and-so's experienced bullying. This is the nature of the situation. This is who was involved last year. The safety plan can also incorporate, ways that the student can self-soothe, and developing those self-soothing and coping skills. Ways that the school can address tensions and conflicts amongst students, and then also could set up a buddy system for a student, like that they're always going to change classes with a buddy, and that they're always going to have someone with them. This is really like, these are just ideas. It's really about what works for your student and what would keep them safe. So thinking about bullying and students with disabilities, a family has the right to ask for an IEP meeting to talk about bullying incidents and their concerns and ask for those incidents and concerns to be added to the IEP. So you can ask an IEP team to mention bullying in the IEP. You can ask for an IEP meeting to discuss these things. And you can even think about adding supports and services that could help the IEP. So, all those things that we talked about on the last slide could be mandated in an IEP. Things like counseling, a social skills group, positive behavioral support, para, a safety plan, academic supports, changing the special education program. All of that could be mandated through the IEP. And then if a student's behavior is affecting their ability to learn, that's a great opportunity to ask for an FBA, a functional behavior assessment, or a BIP, behavior intervention plan. So let's say it doesn't work and the school does not address and prevent future bullying. You should talk to your principal. If that doesn't work, email Respect for All. If that doesn't work, go to the superintendent's office for your district, email LGBTQ at schools, and call AFC. Tell us what's going on, and we can talk to you about how to address it. And then if you're really not satisfied with the DOE response, you have the right to file a complaint with the New York State Department of Human Rights or with the Federal Office of Civil Rights. So an OCR complaint, the federal option, does have to be done within 180 days of the incident. Okay, so then thinking about student-to-student sexual harassment. So Title IX and Chancellor's Reg 831 protects students against sexual harassment by other students. To report any such incident, you should contact your principal, the school sexual harassment prevention liaison, or any school staff member. School staff are trained in all of these policies. If your report gets to anyone, they then have instructions on what to do next, right? To call their principal right away, to call the sexual harassment prevention liaison. So do not stress out about figuring out who is the sexual harassment prevention liaison. Tell anyone at the school and they can help. They are responsible for getting that information to the right person. There is a complaint form on the DOE website that lists like the types of information that you need to provide. You can print that out, fill it out, give it to somebody at the school, email it to someone at the school. You can also submit a complaint online, it's linked here. You can email Respect for All. Because Respect for All covers all bullying, harassment, or discrimination, that's why we're referencing it so much. It's kind of an all-encompassing umbrella. And you can email the Title IX coordinator at Title IX Inquiries. And then thinking about bullying or discrimination by school staff, either towards students or families. Actions by school staff towards students, towards families, can also be considered bullying, harassment, or discrimination. So let's say a student is being bullied by a staff for being an LGBTQ student, or maybe the family, maybe one of the parents is LGBTQ, and the staff is discriminating against them. That can and should be reported. So to report corporal punishment or verbal abuse by staff, you can do one of these three things. Tell the principal, submit an OSI complaint online. That's the Office of Special Investigations, or you can call OSI at this number. To report discrimination or harassment by staff, again, towards students or towards families, you should submit an Office of Equal Opportunity complaint, an OEO complaint, available online, or you can call this number. If you submit an OSI complaint, the investigation has to be completed within 15 school days. So you should receive a response within 15 school days. And you can look at Chancellor's Reg 420 for more details. And for an OEO complaint, that investigation process is longer. An OEO investigation, the timeline for it is 90 school days. And those complaints fall under Chancellor's Reg 830. So as we've said continuously, students have a right to be safe at school, right? Schools have to address and prevent future bullying. But if for whatever reason, after a conversation with you and your student, your student just says like, look, I don't feel safe. I don't want to go back to that school. You have options. There are options for transfers. There are options for alternative school options. That's what we're going to talk about now. So a safety transfer is an option that you can ask your school for or the Family Welcome Center. It doesn't require an incident of physical harm having happened. You don't have to file a police report. As long as there has been risk to physical, emotional, or mental health, that is enough for a safety transfer. For a guidance counselor, this is available if a student isn't progressing or isn't succeeding academically or socially, and in going to a new school would address those concerns. If you want a guidance transfer, you should go to your Family Welcome Center with supporting documents that show that the student is struggling in that way. Medical transfer, this is applicable if a student needs a new school because of a physical disability, an illness, pregnancy, or mental health needs. In order to request it, you just need to submit a letter from a medical provider explaining the medical condition and why the student needs to change schools. Something to think about for medical transfers is, let's say a student is transitioning and they're going to be starting hormone therapy. That is a very valid reason to ask for a medical transfer. Similarly, if they've experienced, unfortunately, if they experienced bullying or harassment and now have really tremendous anxiety about that school, that is a reason to ask for a medical transfer. Another option that isn't directly related to what they've experienced at their school is the travel hardship transfer. So if a student lives more than 75 minutes from their school traveling by public transit, they are eligible for a travel hardship transfer. If you'd like to request one, just bring proof of your address to the Family Welcome Center. And then if a student is at a charter school currently, they can always leave their charter school. They always have the right to leave their charter school and attend a DOE school instead. They can request a placement in a DOE school at the Family Welcome Center, or if they're kindergarten through 8th grade, they can just register at their zone. Something to keep in mind here, for all of these options, a school cannot force a student to transfer. These options are available if the student and the family want to transfer. Schools cannot force students to transfer. If that's happening, definitely contact ASB. In terms of some other school options, transfer schools are an option for students who are behind in credits. Oftentimes, these schools have smaller classes and are able to give more individualized attention as a result. So Harvey Milk is a transfer school specifically designed for LGBTQ students and their families, and LGBTQ families. James Baldwin is also a really supportive and inclusive transfer school. Broome Street Academy is a charter transfer school that's located at the door. Then we have YABCs, Young Adult Borough Centers. These are evening programs for students who can't go to class during the day that allow students to earn a readings diploma. And then we have high school equivalency programs. So the DOE and other community organizations offer free programs to earn the high school equivalency diploma by passing a GED exam. Okay, so thinking about LGBTQ students in discipline. Research suggests that LGBTQ students experience much higher rates of school discipline. So because of the disproportionate experience of school discipline, we want to keep in mind certain things related to discipline. So schools cannot discipline students based on their gender identity, their gender expression, or their sexual orientation. And schools cannot retaliate against students for reporting bullying. If you or your student believe that they're facing school discipline for one of those reasons, they should file a complaint with the Office of Equal Opportunity, linked here where it says complaint. And if a student is going to a suspension hearing, you should absolutely call AFC, regardless of whether it's related to their LGBTQ identity or not. Call AFC about any suspension hearing. But if specifically with suspension hearings, if a student receives a superintendent suspension for something related to their gender, their sexuality, or in retaliation for bullying, they should say that right at the beginning of their hearing. But I'll call AFC to talk more about that. And then thinking about LGBTQ students in temporary housing. LGBTQ students are enormously overrepresented in temporary housing. So the most recent numbers that we have here are from 2019, but this is true all over the country, as well as in New York City. But the numbers are, at least in this study, are split up between lesbian, gay, bisexual, and questioning, and then transgender. So split up really by sexuality and gender. But LGBTQ high school students were 2.18 times, so a little over 2 times more likely to experience homelessness than their straight peers. And trans students were over 9 times likely to experience homelessness than their cis peers. So that is enormous. And it means that a lot of the students in shelter are LGBTQ. So once students are already homeless, LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness miss school at 2 times the rate of their straight housed peers due to safety concerns. And LGBTQ youth are 3 times more likely to be bullied on school property, and 2 times more likely to be cyberbullied than their straight peers. This is something to think about, both in terms of discipline and school attendance. If you have experienced significant bullying at school, that is going to affect whether you attend school, whether you continue to attend school. So because of this, again, really disproportionate overrepresentation of LGBTQ students in temporary housing, we want to make sure that we're thinking about the laws protecting students in temporary housing and the laws protecting LGBTQ students. So it's important to think about the McKinney-Vento Act and the DOE Chancellor's Regulation A780. So McKinney-Vento applies to students without fixed, regular, or adequate housing. Students without fixed, regular, or adequate housing are considered students in temporary housing. These students might be living in a runaway or homeless youth shelter. They could be temporarily like sharing the housing of others. Maybe they're staying with a friend, they're couch surfing, or they're in other temporary housing, like a shelter. Students in temporary housing are entitled to choose to remain at or return to their school of origin, so wherever they last attended school when they were permanently housed, or where they last attended school, or they're entitled to enroll in a new school near where they're staying now. They're entitled to immediate enrollment without providing any documents. They don't need to provide the documents that are usually required, like medical form, immunization records, proof of address. None of that is required if you're a student in temporary housing. And students in temporary housing are entitled to transportation to school. So this is really important, especially if the student is remaining at their school of origin, but now they're living in a shelter that's across the city. They're entitled to transportation to get them to and from. And we, again, want to make sure that we keep in mind that students in temporary, this STH designation, you are a student in temporary housing, even if you're staying at a friend's house or staying at a friend's apartment, living doubled up, you are a student in temporary housing, you're entitled to these protections. And this includes students who unfortunately were kicked out or ran away from home. So again, with the disproportionate number of LGBTQ youth in temporary housing, many of these youth are unaccompanied. So unaccompanied youth are students in temporary housing who are not living with a parent or guardian. Unaccompanied youth have the right to make decisions about school without parental consent with the help of an STH regional manager. So if I have, maybe I've run away from home in New York City, or I've run away from home and now I am in New York, I would qualify as an unaccompanied youth, and I'm able to make decisions about school without my parents' involvement and without my parents' consent. I can also apply for federal financial aid for college as what's called an independent student, which allows me to not provide parent or guardian financial info on the FAFSA form. And then just a few quick things. So this is the school search, schoolsearch.schools.nyc website. This is basically the school directory for New York City schools. You type in your school name here and you hit search. And when you do that, you can find certain information about your particular school. So this is how you can find school-based support. So if we look at the Jill Chaffetz Transfer High School, this is what comes up after you search it. If you scroll down to mental health and wellness, and you click on this tab, this will open up, and this has a list of all of the different supports that are available at the school. So we've got a school-based mental health clinic. It's a community school, so it gives the information for the CBO that pushes into the school, and then options for supports that are available at the district level. And then if I want to find the RFA liaison or the sexual harassment prevention liaison, I can also do this on the site. So I click school contacts and information. I click the little caret so it opens up. And then this, sorry, I did it on the wrong screen. This window pops up or the tab expands and you can see who the principal is, who the parent coordinator is, RFA liaison, the sexual harassment prevention liaison, and a link to how to report bullying. These, when you're on the actual DOE website, these blue links, if you click on them, it goes right to what their email is. And then just to sum up, resources for LGBTQ students. Again, the LGBTQ email is your friend, way to reach the office directly. We've got the DOE guidelines that we talked about before. We have state guidance, that's the State Board of Education guidance on supporting trans and gender expansive students. We have the AFC guide for LGBTQ students. And if you click this guide, at the end of it, we have lots of resources listed, like external organizations as well. If you are a DOE staff member and you want more information about parts that DOE has, you can click this DOE Info Hub page. You have to have a DOE login to access it. And then thinking about inclusive curriculum resources. When these are resources that the DOE has put together so that teachers and staff can essentially teach an inclusive curriculum, which is a great way to prevent bullying, harassment, and discrimination. If we are teaching about all people, if we're teaching inclusively about everyone, it promotes respect for diversity, and it is a great way to get at the biases, the misinformation about these communities. All right, so thank you all for joining me. Probably the first time in my life that I've finished a training early, 4 minutes early, but we have, if you're interested in receiving emails from ASC, we send out newsletters. You can sign up for that by going to bit.ly/ASC signup. And if you'd like to call us with questions and reach our helpline, this is the information for our helpline, and this is the information on how to email us as well. I am just going to juggle Zoom for a moment. I'm going to launch a poll so we can get folks' feedback. And while folks are filling this out, I'm also just going to answer some of the questions that came in through Eventbrite if people had questions. So we got a question about how to work with school administrators who still follow gendered norms because of parental pressure. I would recommend pointing them to the guidelines that we talked about, remind them that it's not a choice. They have to follow these guidelines. And if the administrators want to follow the guidelines, but they're getting pushback from parents, they should lean on their district superintendent. And I would reach out to, again, LGBTQ at schools. Another question was how to help our community deal with combating misinformation about members of the LGBTQ and trans community. So that's why I specifically shared the resources for inclusive curriculums that the DOE has already created. I would also suggest working with CBOs that really know your community, right? So bringing in community organizations that understand the school community and can speak to that and address that bias and misinformation. Again, also we talked about Harvey Milk. They have been around for a very long time and have been working as a school with a really inclusive model for a really long time. And if your school has questions about how to bring some of those supports to your school, they are a great model to look at. We also had a question about whether outside organizations contracted as after-school programs in public schools have to follow the same laws as public schools. It's a great question. The anti-discrimination laws still apply, right? The DOE guidelines don't. So the federal, state, city laws around anti-discrimination, that is still applicable. And then one last question was, what protections are there for LGBTQ staff in the DOE? You are protected as an employee, and I would recommend looking at the Office of Equal Opportunity and looking at an EEOC complaint. And the DOE does have a complaint process. Yes, you have protections, and the DOE has a complaint process for all of those situations. And then we have a question in the Q&A. Does this information work for charter schools? Yes. State and federal law apply to charter schools. Again, the DOE guidelines do not. But I would recommend asking your charter school what their policies are and seeing what it says in writing and then seeing if they follow those policies. All right, thank you all for joining. It was over your lunch break. I appreciate you spending your lunch break with me. But if you have any questions, please always know you can reach out. You can give AFC a call. You can send us an email. And I hope this is helpful. I would absolutely recommend reading our LGBTQ guide on our website. All right, thanks all. Have a good day.